Hello, everyone. My name is Emily Lester, and I am the social media manager and the French wine correspondent for the Napa Valley Wine Academy. And I'm very excited today because I'm going to be interviewing Melanie Kraus. She is the head winemaker and co-owner of Cinder wines in Idaho. And Napa Valley Wine Academy offers a variety of proprietary programs, including our American Wine Expert, which was recently newly launched. So this is part of a series of interviews that we're going to be doing for our American Wine Road Trip program across the United States. And part of the reason why we're doing this is to really illuminate the voices and the stories of the winemakers in lesser known regions like Idaho. So I'm really excited to be talking to you today about your region and about your wines and about your story. So welcome, Melanie.
Thank you. I'm excited as well.
So first, let's just start with tell me where you are.
Well, I'm in my tasting room in Boise, Idaho, and we have a winery here. It's right in downtown, an urban winery. And we purchased our grapes from local Idaho and Oregon grapes. So we are very close to the Oregon border. And we have a Snake River Valley American viticulture area is about 80% Idaho, about 20% Oregon. And so the vineyards that I buy from are all within about 1 hour of Boise, and they're right there in that border area.
And what is the, is there that's the actual AVA, is the Snake River in that specific area?
Yeah, the Snake River Valley AVA.
Okay. And what are the dominant grape types that you work with?
Well, this is a really warm climate and cold winters. So it's a continental climate similar to something that you might encounter in Eastern Washington or over in Europe, very similar to a place like Ribera del Duero.
Okay.
So we focus on grapes that really like hot summers and don't mind, somewhat cold winters.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's surprisingly mild here compared to what people think about Idaho. They kind of visualize it as being somewhere in the Rocky Mountains.
Exactly.
But I think what's important to know about the climate here is that we are part of the Northwest in climatic and soil type, all those reasons. So our weather comes from the Pacific Ocean across Washington and Oregon to Idaho. It does not come from the Arctic like the Midwest. So I think that's something that maybe is hard for people to conceptualize, because if you haven't been to Idaho, you think of it as just being mostly some mountainous place.
Yeah, exactly.
But we do have two major low-lying valleys. They're low compared to the rest of the state, although they are higher elevation compared to the West Coast wine regions. Mm-hmm. So the Snake River Valley AVA is about 2,300 feet elevation. Wow. And the Lewis Clark AVA, which is our other major AVA, is about 600 feet elevation.
Wow.
And yeah, being lower than the rest of the state gives them kind of a banana belt effect. They're pretty mild in the winter. People actually move here because they feel like it's a place where they can have 4 seasons but not have a dreadful winter.
That's a good point. Exactly.
It is 100 degrees right now outside, so the summer feels a little bit dreadful, but that's just, that'll be a week or so. And then it'll go back to the 80s and 90s.
And that isn't typical, right? That 100-degree weather, that's not something that you experience very often in the summers. Is that new?
Not really new, but it's just like a few days each season will tip up over 100, but it doesn't stay that way for long. It's not very consistent, but it's consistent that each summer we might experience a handful of days over 100.
More and more. And how does the elevation impact the vineyards themselves?
Well, it helps with I guess, kind of like a moderating effect on the temperature. It's a little cooler than Eastern Washington, so where they're making all sorts of magnificent red grapes over there, we make those same grapes, but I think we also make a little bit more aromatic white wines. We hold on to our acid a little bit longer because the elevation keeps it from getting too excessively hot. Mm-hmm. It's semi-arid here, so there's hardly any water in the air. At night, it gets very cool, so we'll often have 40-degree shifts between day and night temperatures.
Wow.
And that all helps with, just making nice, graceful wines.
Yeah, regulate the diurnal changes.
Yeah.
The-
Oh, and I totally didn't answer your initial question, which was what grape varieties do we make here? So at Cinder, my favorite varieties to make are Syrah, Viognier, and Tempranillo.
Okay.
There are grapes that like that sort of hot continental climate,
Mhm.
and we've had really good success with them. Particularly Viognier, that's probably our flagship wine of the winery.
Yeah.
It seems to do well in the Snake River Valley. Other producers also make lovely Viognier here. So something about that diurnal shift, I suspect, is a large reason why we seem to be able to make very varietal, typical Viogniers, and that they're very pretty
Mhm.
aromatics and nice texture, but they're also very grateful. We don't tend to get them overly ripe. So they have manageable alcohols, they have graceful acid on the finish, and well, I really like them. So
I'm really wanting to taste one right now. You got me
yeah,
salivating for Viognier.
yeah, it'd be nice.
Yeah. So what is if you were to compare, I can just tell you with my experience, and when I think of Viognier, I always think of the Rhone predominantly. So how would one kind of compare a typical Rhone Viognier to a Viognier that you would find in the Snake River Valley? What are kind of the differences that you could tell in those two?
Well, for my style of Viognier that I make, I do all stainless steel fermentation, and I try to pick it as soon as those flavors come on with as low of sugar, therefore alcohol, as possible. And so I would say that my style takes Viognier into this end of the spectrum that's crisp, like really on more of the lean crisp side.
Mhm.
And we might expect some of the Viogniers from other regions, including country, probably to be a little bit richer, heavier
Okay.
bodied, so forth.
Okay.
This is a small region, and we only have about 70 wineries. Maybe 10 of us make Viognier, or even
Oh, wow.
less, maybe. So it's such a young region that it's a little bit hard to generalize about, well, this is a typical Idaho Viognier. Because if you
Mhm.
only have maybe 3 makers completely dominating the Viognier scene, it's so reflective of their style. I'm not
Yeah.
sure that we're really at a point as a region where we have like defined characteristics of certain grapes. What we
Mhm.
know for certain is that we can grow a really wide range of Vitis vinifera, and
Mhm.
lots of different styles of wine are being made. And as to how much of that is the influence of the region and how much is the not very many winemakers that are in the state, it's hard to say.
I do love that though about American wines and my experience interviewing different American winemakers versus over here is that you have so much creative control a little bit, or your ability to kind of play and experiment and really create something that is uniquely yours and experimenting with your terroir. I think that that's probably one of the most positive points about American wines and what we're able to do in that particular in North America versus other places in Europe. And the diversity of the wines in the US is always I'm very taken by it, and I love it. So especially discovering some of the lesser known regions like Idaho. When we originally started this project, I actually had no idea that Idaho made wine. So it was really cool to kind of go down a rabbit hole and learn so much about that area while preparing for this interview. And one of the things I'm really excited to ask you about is about the soil types, because it seems like you have quite a bit of diversity too, coming from the mountains and the basalts, right, along that area too, in the volcanic.
Yeah. Yes, there's a lot of soil types. I buy from 7 vineyards.
Yeah,
We don't own vineyards ourselves, not yet anyway. We
not
do
yet.
long-term contracts with our growers, but all 7 vineyards have different soil types.
Wow.
And yeah, it's really cool because it makes for some really fun creativity with the wine, like you were saying, really different characteristics, say like in Syrah, grown from 3 different um, vineyards. They all taste quite distinct from each other, which makes for really fun blending for me.
I bet. Yeah.
But the reason why our soils are so diverse and mixed up kind of goes back to the story of the AVA. Its borders are ancient Lake Idaho, which was a huge lake that covered most of southwestern Idaho, like 9 million years ago, or some ridiculously large number. Don't quote me on that. But
It's a long time.
It existed for a very long time, then eventually drained out the Snake River and started to carve what we call the Hell's Canyon, super deep canyon people might have heard of. So there's within the AVA, almost every vineyard has some influence of that lake bottom sediment. However, things really got mixed up when the Great Salt Lake, which at the time was called the Bonneville Lake, so it covered most of Utah and Nevada. It was absolutely massive. Wow. It emptied out the Snake River as well after ancient Lake Idaho drained. And it was a flood of such monumental size that it was able to rearrange almost all the topography of the Snake River Valley. So it changed everything, like resorted all sorts of soil, carved away canyons and cliffs, and put sand one place, silt another place, boulders a third place, stuff like that. Wow. So you have those things making the landscape very interesting, confusing, amazing amounts of microclimates. And then the third thing, which is how we got our name of Cinder, is that way back earlier, I'm not going in chronological order here, when ancient Lake Idaho existed, there were volcanoes erupting under the lake. Wow. This area, the Snake River Valley was carved out by the same hotspot that now forms Yellowstone National Park. That was gonna be my next question, the continental hotspots, like Yellowstone. Okay. Yeah, so this valley that we're in is a rift valley caused by the Yellowstone hotspot. So it's very thin, the crust is very thin, and there's been amazing amounts of volcanic activity through the years. Now, where we grow our grapes, there were volcanoes erupting underneath the lake, which means that when they come out into the water, the hot lava shatters and then floats down and forms this small cinder stuff like we might use in landscaping or something. That's how we decided on our name, Cinder, because several of the vineyards around here are planted directly into these extinct volcanoes. And they're not the big basalt flows that form the columns. They're these small shattered particles of cinder. Scoria is another name for it. And it makes really good vineyards, very well drained soil and so forth. Very easy for the growers to manage their water and things like that.
Oh, I'm a big soil nerd, so I'm hanging on to every word you're saying right now. I love it. I remember actually taking geology in Washington State and driving out and seeing some of the basalts in the Columbia River Canyon too, and it's amazing just the richness there and being able to see data and just the mosaic of soil types that you find in that area. And I'm sure the diversity of the wines is just numerous compared to all of that. And I would love to ask you about your winemaking process as well, because you purchase your grapes. So a lot of what you're doing is involve the actual process itself. So can we start at harvest? Do you participate in the harvest at all or oversee the growers that you have contracts with? Or how does that whole process work when you begin the harvest? Or you just buy the grapes directly and then?
Well, we should probably start with bud break because that's really when I start working closely with my growers. So we have long-term contracts that lay out some of the really general stuff, like how many tons per acre are we shooting for, some really broad practices. But the way we make really good wine is to work really closely and have a good relationship with our growers, starting from when the buds break out in April, they start to leaf, and from that point on all the way through harvest, I visit each of my blocks about every other week, chat with my growers, talk about what's going on, what Mother Nature is doing in that particular year and so forth. So we the longer that I work with my growers, and some of them I've been working with for 15 years now, the better the wines become, because we understand each other, what style I'm going for, what
Yeah.
their particular capabilities or restraints might be. Lots of my growers grow fruit as well, or other crops.
Mhm.
So they might, like one grower has a big cherry crop, they might need to do their leafing slightly earlier, right before cherries, so they can bring that harvest in and so forth. So that's the sort of fine detail that we start to work out through the years, the longer that we work with each other.
There.
And during harvest, certainly I am out as the grapes approach ripeness, then I start to visit that block more
Mhm.
and more frequently until I'm forecasting to the grower, okay, I think these are about a week out. What's your schedule like? What's my schedule like? And we start to put together the pick date and decide, okay, it's going to be Wednesday or whatever. We bring the bins out, they pick into our bins, we take them home and do everything from there.
Okay.
We're in an urban winery here, but we do all the winemaking process. So we have a crush pad and barrel room. We're setting up to bottle right now. So if you hear any loud banging noises in the back, it's probably the guys getting ready for a bottling day.
It's real time.
Yep. And I'm standing in my tasting room. So it's the full deal here. Everything outside of the grape growing happens at the winery.
People get to experience it all when they come and visit, I imagine.
Yeah.
So when they arrive at the winery. So do you do any type of vineyard sorting with the harvest, or do you do sorting when they arrive in the
Well,
vineyard?
if there's anything really troublesome, we try to sort that out with the pick so it doesn't come into the winery. We don't have a sorter here yet. That's an ambition of my husband's, but I kind of think you should do all that work out in the vineyard. So that's something we argue about. But
Different philosophies on that subject.
yeah, so the grapes come in and we crush or press them. Most of our white wines we ferment in tanks, stainless steel style, but we do some amount of barrel fermentation, mostly neutral barrels with our Chardonnay. And then reds, this is a small winery. We only make about 10,000 cases. So almost all of our reds are fermented in 1 ton or 1.5 ton bins that we hand punch down. We don't have very many red tanks yet, or pump overs, things like that. So still quite a small scale here.
And so is it mostly what you're producing then is white, correct? Is that mostly your?
We're actually right about 50-50 with our portfolio, whites and reds.
Okay. And do any of your whites go through malolactic fermentation? Do all of them go through malolactic fermentation, or do you?
We take about 30% of our Chardonnay program through malolactic fermentation, and then the rest, no, we keep it cold and don't let that take place. So I do like, to some degree, that thickness of the texture that malolactic enhances in Chardonnay, but also I want my Chardonnay to be quite graceful on the finish. And that's kind of a theme, I think, with me and my whites, is I'm looking for white wines that are as aromatic as we can make them and really graceful the way that they feel in the mouth. And so I feel like that's better done with less malolactic. So the other 70% of my Chardonnay is, some of it is straight stainless steel, some of it's neutral barrel fermentation, but it's all bottled without going through malolactic.
Okay. And how long is it? How long are you hanging on to the wine, aging the wine until you put it in bottle for the different?
Well, all of our aromatic white wines, like the Viognier or Riesling, we pretty much bottle them as soon as we can. So we start in January after a harvest and just bottle wine as fast as we can until it's done. The Chardonnay, because it does barrel age, we don't bottle until May. So, that's some degree of barrel aging, but not a really dominant characteristic in the wine. And then the red wines age for 1.5 years, nearly 2 years. So they definitely significant time in barrel.
And just to go back to the region itself, I'll ask you a question, kind of a final question, is what is it that you think is the most important key points about your region, especially for wine students and for wine professionals?
Well, one is that it's a very fast growing, up and coming region. So whatever, wines we've produced in the past don't necessarily indicate what we'll make in the future. The quality of our wine is increasing really rapidly, the quality of our vineyards and so forth, as the region expands. So it's a really exciting place to make wine, to drink wine. And we have all of the natural resources in our state to make amazing wines from Vitis vinifera. So it's not like we're forcing winemaking on this state. The state is a wonderful place to grow wine. It's just that the state has had such small population for most of its history that the development of the wine industry has been quite slow compared to our neighboring states of Oregon and Washington.
Yeah.
But it has all the elements there to make incredible wines and keep making even better ones than we've already made. So that's extremely exciting, and why I have no intention of moving and making wine somewhere else.
Well, I am definitely very curious and can't wait to go visit my family back in the Pacific Northwest and try some of your wines. It's going to be one of the things I'll do. Thank you so much for your time, Melanie. It was really a pleasure, and speaking to our students more about your region and about your winemaking process. We value that so much, and it's wonderful to be able to illuminate some of the voices of these really rich regions like Idaho more and more with our new American Wine Expert Program.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.